Admit a couple more people in. Hey, welcome to the people who just joined in. So welcome to tonight's program, Accidental Travel Writer, Bangladesh Land of Rivers, presented by David Mould with Storrs Library. My name is Lindsay. I'm a library assistant with Storrs Library, and I'm helping moderate this program tonight. Our presenter tonight is David Mould, Ph.D., Professor Emeritus of Media Arts and Studies at Ohio University. He has traveled widely in Asia and Southern Africa. This program is part of his Travel Writer series, and tonight David will share with us about his travels in Bangladesh. David, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Okay, well, thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate your welcome, and thank you for Storrs Library for hosting yet another one. This is number 7. I think I've got one more to do on Indonesia. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a place called Barisal, my background rather, in southern Bangladesh, and this is what's called the Ghat, the Ghat, which kind of is the river terminal. As you can see, it's a pretty busy place. Lots of boats lined up. There are larger craft just a little upriver. We'll be going there a little bit later, but I entitle this presentation Bangladesh Land of Rivers because rivers really do define this this country. And let me just share screen here. Okay. And Bangladesh is the country I most recently visited. I made 7 trips there between 2017 and 2020, and got back from Bangladesh in February 2020, just about 2 years ago, just as everything was starting to shut down in Asia. And I really haven't been anywhere since then. Can't wait to get back on the road and on a plane. So let's see. Oh dear, it's not responding here. Let me just stop my share and start this PowerPoint again if I can. Okay, it's not moving along very well. Okay, let's try this one. There we go. Okay, so Bangladesh, very small country. You can sort of see it, that sort of turquoisey bit on the map. Unfortunately, on that map, it's got the same color as Pakistan, which it's no longer part of. It's about the size of Illinois or Iowa, and it's got a strange shape, and that is a result of the partition of British India in 1947. We'll get to that later. And in this very small country, about 168, 170 million people. So think of it the size of Illinois or Iowa, but a population of about half that of the United States. It's a crowded country. And it's also got a lot of rivers, about 700, although when you get to a place like Bangladesh, defining what's a river and what isn't becomes a bit problematic. So, we think of rivers that have tributaries, smaller rivers or streams flowing into them. Well, in Bangladesh, you not only have tributaries to rivers, but you have things that are called technically distributaries, where you have a river which then splits into various channels there. So about 10% of the country is water. I mean, water all the time, but there are no large lakes. So what that means is that most of the time that water is moving. It's rivers. So 3 major systems here. The Brahmaputra River, which rises in Tibet, flows through the Indian state of Assam, and then turns south into Bangladesh, where it is renamed the Jamuna. There's the Ganges flowing through India, which becomes the Padma in Bangladesh, and then another river system called the Meghna. So all of those 3 major systems come together in Bangladesh. And you can see the delta region down there in the Bay of Bengal. It's about 23,000 square miles. It's the largest delta area in the world, almost as large as the state where I live, West Virginia, by itself. And the delta region, we'll come back to this a little bit later, is kind of ground zero for climate change. You have floods and every year you have cyclones coming up from the Bay of Bengal, which submerge low-lying islands, and they push saltwater, brackish water inland, making a lot of land which was once used for farming not cultivable anymore. So for Bangladesh's rural population, the river's eerily interwoven with every part of their lives. It sustains agriculture, rice paddies, fields of corn, mango orchards, fish and shrimp farms. Fish are the main source of protein for much of the population there, and the river's also the main highway for commerce. So you have small boats, as you see in this picture, carrying fruits and vegetables, but also livestock, building materials. Not unusual to see, cattle on a little boat there. And in many places, if you want to get to the doctor, you want to get to the government office, you want to get to school, you travel by river. There's flooding every year. The first year I was in Bangladesh was 2017, and the floods were there that year the worst in a decade. The first rains came in April, which is about 3 months ahead of the normal monsoon season. And those inundated the rice paddies. I mean, rice is one of the staples of the diet there, before farmers could harvest their first crop. But though the land is very fertile, they're able to raise 3 rice crops a year in Bangladesh. And lots of streams burst their banks, and thousands of acres were flooded. About 700,000 homes were destroyed, about 150 people lost their lives. And so some more pictures of the flooding here. About 8 million people sought shelter on higher ground in 2017. And, this created huge issues. I mean, Bangladesh is used to flooding. There's flooding every year, but 2017 was particularly bad. And you can sort of see the cattle there on that sort of little strip of land there. So for the government, for relief organizations, it was a real challenge, as it is whenever it floods, to provide clean water and sanitation. Floodwaters are breeding grounds for waterborne diseases, diarrhea, malaria, dengue, Japanese encephalitis. And reaching stranded communities was a real challenge. And I love this photograph. This is from the Bangladesh Star, and I actually got permission to use it from the Star in my book, Monsoon Postcards. And this shows what happens when the river floods and hits the railroad tracks. They kind of washed a lot of the track bed away and sort of left this kind of roller coaster there, which obviously had to be rebuilt and repaired. This is the capital. Actually, the photo on the left is of Chittagong, which is the second largest city, the port city down in the southwest. The photo on the right, which actually I use on the front cover of my book, is in Dhaka, the capital. And it escaped the worst of the flooding there, but still banks were washed away. A lot of people's shanties built on railroad tracks and on wasteland were washed away as well. And urban planners blamed the waterlogging on inadequate drainage and pumping systems, and there were the usual accusations of government officials allowing developers to build on land that they should not be building on. So what's happened, and we'll look at Dhaka's population in a little bit here, is that over the years, there's been a lot of development, a lot of building, and many of the buildings have gone onto canals and rivers, or canals really, that provided drainage for the capital. So these drainage channels are blocked off, and little culverts are clogged with trash and building materials. People still get around as well as they can during the flooding here, and I certainly experienced it myself. Probably the bicycle rickshaws that you see there are the most reliable way to get around in floodwater, because the auto rickshaws and some of the vehicles tend to stall out. So, people just get on with their lives. They get through the floodwaters. They somehow get to work. They somehow get to the shops and just survive, because it's there. It happens every year. So in a country with so many rivers, it's not surprising that the symbol of the ruling political party, the Awami League, is the boat. Vote the boat. Okay, led by Sheikh Hasina here, it's the boat in question is a traditional Bangladeshi boat. Is called a nuka, spelled N-O-U-K-A, and it has this kind of high prow. And I mean, the reason vote the boat is important rather than vote the Awami League is that especially in rural areas, some literacy levels are low. So having a symbol for your political party, something that's recognizable, in the culture, is important. So I was actually in Bangladesh also in September 2018, a couple of months before parliamentary elections. And so Sheikh Hasina's image, along with the boat, was plastered over many walls, many buildings. And meanwhile, her main political rival, the Bangladesh National Party's leader, Khaleda Zia, had been languishing in prison, locked up on corruption charges that a lot of people think are politically motivated. So politics in Bangladesh is something of a blood sport there. I love this quote. There's a great quote from Lord Mountbatten, who was the last British viceroy in India, talking about Bengal, which became Bangladesh, and he said, when you have two Bengalis, you have two political parties. When you have three, you have two parties, each with three wings. So politics, as I say, is pretty intense there and pretty divisive. So this is another city. These are political posters from another city. I love this here, and again, it sort of points to this sort of literacy issue, because as you see, every candidate here, and they are running for district level and municipal level offices there, mostly men with these sort of serious, unsmiling faces. Okay, and the local. The Bangladesh National Party, its local symbol is a pineapple you'll see in the top left there, which presumably represents fruitfulness or agriculture or something. And then we have some images that represent kind of the marine life. There's this, looks like a dolphin down there on the right there. I particularly like the guy with the wrench here. And I mean, I can't read the Bangladesh. Well, somebody actually translated for me, but basically, it boils down to, I'm the guy who's going to fix the problem, something like that. I've got the wrench. All right. So back to Dhaka here, and it's a very, very crowded city, and I've actually quoted this in a previous presentation here, the traffic jam that never ends. And this is from a World Bank report, which indicates that traffic speed, and because of congestion, traffic speeds dropped from 13 miles an hour to less than 5 miles an hour over the past decade. And it's going to go down even more, assuming, continued growth. Now, the country the government promises to build new roads, put a subway system in there, but still, it's difficult to see how congestion is going to stop. And it uses up a lot of work time. So that obviously has a real effect on the economy. These are some of the buses in Dhaka, which look like they've kind of been through the traffic walls there. Panels scraped and dented, windows missing. There are a lot of private bus companies here which are pretty much unregulated. And I have to say, having driven, I did not drive in Dhaka, I was driven. Let me be correct about that. Let me be precise about that. I would not drive there. Lane discipline is absolutely not part of the driving culture. You get somewhere as fast as you can, which means cutting in on other people, weaving across, and the drivers seem to judge distance pretty well, sort of like missing a vehicle kind of by an inch, a small amount. And as for traffic signals, those are merely roadside ornaments which go on and off, but people generally don't pay any attention. So this is probably the quickest way to get around. This is called the CNG, which is the acronym for compressed natural gas. And these are, because they're small, they can kind of weave between the traffic a little bit. They're small. The way I put it is that on the back seat, the bench seat there, you can put sort of 2 well-fed Westerners, or probably 3 Bangladeshis. And, sometimes, especially in rural areas, people are hanging out the sides too. Now, notice the grill on the side of the CNG here. And this is because of the traffic. If you are stopped in traffic, it's very easy for somebody from another CNG or a pedestrian or somebody on a motorbike to reach in, grab your bag or grab your purse and then head off there. So in urban areas, when you get in, the driver shuts the door on you, this grill, so nobody can when you're stopped in traffic, nobody can reach in and grab your goods. Population crunch. Estimating the population of a city like Dhaka, one of the most crowded urban areas in the world, is difficult. Officially about 8.5 million, but that does not count the metropolitan area around it, estimated more than 20 million there. And people are arriving every day. There's some seasonal migration. Farmers come at certain times of the year, but increasingly, especially from the south, there are climate change refugees. As salt water pushes in to the delta area, they're unable to farm rice anymore, and so the sort of the rice paddies that once they had irrigated with fresh water can no longer be cultivated. So a lot of, even in a small country like this, every year, land that was once cultivated has to go out of cultivation because of the inundation of the salt water, the brackish water there. There's this, I think, great quote from this urban historian: "An urban tornado sucking everything into it." Okay, yet at the same time, terrible though that is, the city of Dhaka probably accounts on its own for 20 to 25% of Bangladesh's gross domestic product. So it's really important to the economy. So how did Bangladesh become Bangladesh? I always have to do my little partition story here, though. In Bangladesh's, in this case of Bangladesh, it comes out a little bit differently. So this is British India, and in 1947 it was divided into majority Hindu India and majority Muslim Pakistan, okay, East and West. East Pakistan later becoming Bangladesh. And that was accompanied by genocide on both sides, we would have to say. But let's look at what happened afterwards. So we have these two parts of Pakistan separated by more than 1,500 miles of India. What could possibly go wrong here? They were distinct in so many ways. The only thing that united, or in theory united, East and West Pakistan was religion. They were both majority Muslim areas. But in every other respect, in terms of culture, in terms of history, in terms of language, they were very, very different. Now, the political power was always in the West, in Karachi, later Islamabad, and the military power was there as well. East Pakistan, which actually, though it's smaller in land area, had a larger population, was shortchanged on government budget. But the big factor that led to the 1971 Liberation War was language. In 1948, Jinnah, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the independence leader for Pakistan, declared that Urdu would be the language of the country. Because most religious literature was in Urdu, it would be the national language. This did not go down well in East Pakistan, where people spoke Bangla or Bengali. They spoke the same language as their Hindu neighbors in Calcutta, in West Bengal. Bangla is the sixth most widely spoken language in the world, estimated 250 million speakers. So, and language and identity closely related. So, when you come in and you impose another language on a people, there's going to be trouble. And it started, as often things do in some countries, at universities. In Dhaka University, there were protests, and the police opened fire, killing 12 people who were commemorated as the language martyrs. And there are the monuments to them and to other martyrs all over the country. So language became the kind of catalyst for a growing nationalist and independence movement over the next almost 20 years here. So in 1970, the Awami League, I mentioned it later, earlier in reference to the current Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina. She is the daughter of this guy, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who was a prominent politician there. And in 1970, the Awami League, representing East Pakistan, won a majority in the National Assembly, and that threatened to completely undermine the political power of the West, of West Pakistan. So there were negotiations over a few months and attempts to do peace deals, but in the meantime, the Pakistani army was plotting to put down resistance, a kind of a passive resistance movement in East Pakistan. On March the 25th, 1971, which every Bangladeshi will know that date, the Pakistani army launched what was called Operation Searchlight, coordinated attacks to crush military and political resistance, take control of major cities in East Pakistan. Nobody knows how many people died. I mean, they estimate on that night between 5,000 and 7,000. And it was specifically targeted against the political leadership, the intelligentsia. They went after university professors, they went after doctors, they went after journalists, they went after writers and artists, people who potentially could lead a resistance movement. Basically civil war broke out, and it went on from March to December. India came in and supported, at first clandestinely and then more openly, the Bangladeshis. Estimated about 10 million refugees fled to India. I mean, it's a huge outflux of people from Bangladesh, and some Bangladeshis collaborated with the army. But the Mukti Bahini, the so-called freedom fighters, and there's a wonderful museum in Dhaka about the birth of Bangladesh and the freedom fighters. Really good photographs, great stories, and also very sad stories as well. They operated all over the country. They were blowing up bridges, power plants, and railroads. I mean, as I say this now, I have to think about what might be happening in Ukraine very, very soon. Okay? So in the end, it went badly for Pakistan. India eventually joined in after the Pakistan Air Force was unwise enough to attack Indian air bases. So the Indian army moved in, and very quickly it was all over, but not before the Pakistani army had gone in again and rounded up intellectuals and professionals and shot them. It's never clear how many people lost their lives during the Liberation War. As I said, 10 million fled. Perhaps as many as 3 million Bangladeshis lost their lives during the 9-month conflict here. And the Hindu minority in Bangladesh was targeted as well. And as I say, the intelligentsia, leading people were singled out for both torture and execution. And I think it's, you really can't understand Bangladeshi society right now without figuring in the Liberation War. It's not just something that happened in the past there. It's really there, in everyday discourse. I mean, I've got Bangladeshi friends who have the date 1971 in their email address, and they weren't born in 1971, they were born earlier or later, but 1971 is there. Every politician who stands up and makes a speech on almost any subject refers to the Liberation War, the struggle of 1971. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, let me just back up here. This guy, you still see his poster everywhere. I mean, he was assassinated a few years later, but he and his daughter Sheikh Hasina, the current prime minister, their posters are still everywhere. So the memory of 1971 is very much ingrained into the culture. And even while I was there, I mean, again, this gets a little political. They were still rounding up people, some of them in their 80s, for war crimes committed in 1971. So almost 50 years later, half a century later, people were being arrested and tried in court. Okay, let's get back to Dhaka here, and this is Old Dhaka. And I went around this with on a sort of not a very organized tour, a tour by a group called the Urban Study Group, which is trying to preserve the architecture here. And you look at the picture down on the right there, and a few trees growing out of the roof of that old building there. But I mean, it is a fascinating old part of the city. And the government and private developers want to tear down a lot of these buildings and put up new high-rises there, claiming they're too unsafe or too costly. And kind of the debate about preserving this city, this old part of the city, between the kind of commercial area and the river, which we'll get to in a moment, kind of mirrors conflicts in other cities. It's a beautiful part of the city, but it's sorely neglected. And, you know, this is the part of the city that from about the 17th century prospered. I mean, Dhaka started as a river port with some markets along the banks of the river. Then it became a major commercial center. The main the main industry there, or the main industry that earned money, was the production of muslin, which is a high-quality woven cotton, which was then exported to Europe. So this, Dhaka was a very thriving commercial and muslin producing centre until the 19th century, but then the British were in charge there, and through the use of tariffs, they made muslin kind of expensive, and they flooded the market with imported cotton goods from the north of England, mostly from Manchester. So it was, a cotton shirt from Manchester was cheaper to buy than a locally produced shirt. That's the way that tariffs work. So the Urban Study Group has somehow met its goal of saving some buildings, but there's going to be restoring them is going to be a longer struggle. This is a place called the Water Palace. It's on the banks of the river, the Buriganga River, and it's occupied by the families of, the Army Corps of Engineers. So, trying to get people out, of rent-controlled housing so you can restore the building. There's not the money to do it. It will be a long, long struggle. And part of the Water Palace has been taken over by the Spice Bazaar, which is very colourful and very odoriferous place to walk around. So we wandered through there, and then we get to the bank of the river, the Buriganga River. And a very, very busy place. So the large craft that you see there is what's called a launch. That's a passenger ferry. This will have come up from the Delta region, from a place we'll get to in a few minutes, Barisal, or one of the other ports in the Delta region. And these are nuka, and other craft which are carrying agricultural produce. And then these are porters who are bringing up stuff from these craft to the market, the markets on the river banks. Amazingly, there's no bridge across the river. If you want to cross the river, you've got to get one of these guys down the right with his pole to pole you across the river. And this is some of the produce that was collected there. Cauliflowers and watermelons and pumpkins and gourds, stacked high. But absolutely fascinating and quite a photographic place. I'm quite pleased with some of my pictures from here. All right. So you can't talk about Bangladesh without talking about the major part of the economy here. And this is what's called the RMG, the ready-made garments sector. Second leading clothing exporter after China, supplying a lot of global chains, like Walmart. And major driver of the economy, provides employment, a measure of financial independence for thousands of women who really did not have employment opportunities before the RMG sector opened. They were mostly confined to domestic or part-time work. So there have been low production costs here, but a real cost here, because safety and environmental regulations have regularly flouted. There's certainly a level of corruption here. Wages are not high. There's little money spent on workplace safety. And so, the authorities routinely come in and crack down on a few violators, but it's easy to bribe officials who are not very well paid themselves to overlook violations. The worst disaster in recent time happened in 2013, the so-called Rana Plaza disaster, and that was a building, a kind of a high-rise building that housed several garment factories. It collapsed. The whole building collapsed, leaving 1,100 people dead and hundreds injured. And several criminal cases have been brought, but at least a few months ago when I checked, none of them had yet gone to trial. So the justice system moves slowly there. Okay, we're going to sort of, get on the road here, but I just wanted to spotlight something you've seen in a couple of previous pictures, the flooding pictures, and this is the most common form of commercial transport in Bangladesh. As you see, it's a bicycle, a sort of a three-wheel bicycle with a flatbed. And I said, what is this called? They said, it's called a van. I said, no, a van is like a commercial vehicle, with, like a large car with a utility. I said, no, this is a van. This is what we call a van in Bangladesh. So you'll see everything transported on this. These guys have got, I think, shredded paper to be recycled, but you carry fruit and vegetables, you carry household furniture, you carry bamboo scaffolding poles, you can carry your cow or your goats, or put your whole family on the back. So both, especially in rural areas, but also this is the picture on the right actually is from the old part of Dhaka. It's the most common and actually sort of low emission form of transportation. And there's a kind of upscale motorized version, you'll see that on the left, which is powered by a tiller engine, the sort of engine you would use to power an irrigation pump, larger than a lawnmower engine. And these are used. They've got bamboo scaffolding on there. These would be used to transport building materials, lumber, bricks, things like that. And you can see that the trucks are kind of, what can I say, piled high. Again, not much regulation on how you lash on your load to the truck there. And so, obviously, with the higher it gets, maybe not with the straw there, but, with building materials, the center of gravity is going to shift. And so, fortunately, Bangladesh is pretty flat, most areas, but I mean, if there is a curve or if a vehicle has to swerve, it's gonna tip over because that center of gravity is pretty high. All right, we're going to kind of finish here in the south of Bangladesh, and this is the kind of the picture I have in the background here, or one of the pictures from a place called Barisal that I've visited a few times here. The Venice of Bengal. Yeah, well, okay. I think almost anywhere on the rivers there would be a Venice, because there's waterways everywhere. But this is actually probably the major port in the south of the country, and it's on a distributary. And remember, I just defined that earlier. The rivers have tributaries, and then the big rivers then split into different channels, which are called distributaries. So it's on the distributary of the lower Meghna. And it's kind of commercial center with, carrying freight for, towns in the Delta region. So there are small cargo ships, and then again the Nuka, the all-purpose craft there, which carries, carry people and small and vegetables and other items as well. Now, this is an area that's probably about as disaster prone as anywhere in the world. So when the monsoon rains come, the rivers burst their banks, and the cyclones blow up from the Bay of Bengal, battering homes and crops and whipping up tidal surges. But one of the things that Bangladesh has been able to do over the years, and I think these figures demonstrate it pretty well, is it's gotten pretty good about figuring out what people should do when a cyclone comes. So the weather forecasting, the early warning systems, the systems for getting people out of their homes into shelters. I'm going to say onto higher ground, but there's not much higher ground there. But at least into concrete shelters. So the winds can be 150 miles an hour and huge storm surges as well. So there will be damage. But look at the casualties from the 1970s over the past 50 years, between 1970 and 2019, Fani, which was the last major one there, and lots of people evacuated. And on one trip there, I actually came across, just over dinner at the hotel, I came across some people who were working for a development organization, I think funded by an Islamic organization. And what they were doing was they were building schools that could be used as cyclone shelters when the cyclone came. And one of the interesting things that they told me was that, sometimes people would not come into the cyclone shelter because they wanted to take care of their animals, their cattle and their goats. And so what they did was they kind of built ramps up into the school so you could come in and you could bring your livestock into the school or the cyclone shelter with you. It's one of those rather simple solutions here. But anyway, improved warning systems, which sometimes start off with a guy on a van or guy on a bicycle going around with a powered loudspeaker, but increasingly, mobile phone coverage is pretty good there. People getting text messages and knowing to evacuate, and people take it very, very seriously. This is I showed you one when we were at the Buriganga River in Dhaka. This is one of these ferries, the launch. Okay, as they are called there. I think of a launch as sort of like a smaller vehicle, but they call them launches there, just like they call the bicycle, three-wheel bicycle vans, okay? And so this is at Barisal, and I was lucky enough to take a rather slow launch from Barisal back up the river to Dhaka. It took about 6 hours, I think, and that was actually one of the faster journeys there. So these are often 4 decks high. They carry several hundred passengers, sometimes vehicle and cargo. And this is my friend and colleague from UNICEF and his daughter. This is Sanjit Kumar Das and his young daughter. So they wanted to make sure I got on the right one, that I didn't go the wrong way, given my limited knowledge of Bangla. So I stood on the top deck and waved goodbye to them. And while I was on the top deck, a guy came out of the kitchen and he laid rugs down because, they're Muslims and they have to pray 4 times a day. And so, prayer rugs were laid down so people could pray. Now, it sort of occurred to me that, you probably needed a compass or a smartphone, to adjust the arrow to Mecca because of all of the meanders on the river. So, for, about an hour or so, I stood on the top deck, enjoying the breeze and watching life on the river. So fishermen casting their nets. There were small freighters heading up and downstream. we joined the lower Meghna, which is, a huge river system. And then eventually we get back to where we just were in Dhaka, the Buriganga River at night. And it is quite a nice quite a nice sight. As you're coming into Dhaka, you see the launches with their lights on, leaving and heading south towards the delta. I mean, some people on the slower launches, it's an overnight trip there. So we docked at the ferry terminal, Sadiagat, and I emerged into the craziness of Dhaka again with its auto rickshaws, trucks, buses, and people. And I was kind of already missing the river. Bangladesh, land of rivers. So, okay, I'm right on time here. Thank you so much for your attendance, I guess I have to say here, and I'd be really happy to take questions or comments. This is part of it's extracted from excerpted from my second book, Monsoon Postcards, Indian Ocean Journeys. But I mean, I've done travel in Bangladesh since then, so it's quite updated from there. Okay, we're going to stop the share here and hand back to Lindsay to moderate. Okay.
Okay, we have a question in the chat box here. It says, I recall that in the early 70s, George Harrison, at the request of Ravi Shankar, hosted a rock concert in support of Bangladesh. Do you recall that?
Yeah, I wasn't at that concert, but yes, yeah. I mean, it was quite interesting. There were George Harrison and other leading musicians and artists around the world, tried to rally support, both sort of moral and financial, for Bangladeshis during the Liberation War, which was a brutal war. So no, I mean that has been well documented. I mean, in the United States, it was kind of under the radar because this, of course, was in the middle of the Vietnam era, and so when some Americans I speak to kind of only if they've heard of it, they're only vaguely aware of it. It was kind of like not so much in the headlines. In the British media, it was. But yeah, no, certainly that was one of the early examples of leading figures from entertainment kind of coming forward on a social and political cause and using their reputation to draw attention to the conflict. And to raise money for refugees. So yeah, thank you for reminding me about that. I'd read about that. I didn't include it in the presentation.
The same person also said they recall that the national anthem of Bangladesh and the national anthem of India both have lyrics from poems created by Nobel Prize winner and Bengali literary writer, forgive my pronunciation here,
Rabindranath Tagore. Yes. Okay, that's an interesting. I'd love to know who's giving. Let me just look in the chat to see who. Hang on. Phyllis. Okay. Hang on. No, not Phyllis. It's this is from Nancy. Okay, thank you, Nancy. Yeah, if I'd had time, we would have talked more about Rabindranath Tagore. I mean, I think he was he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1910. But he was a poet and something of a political activist as well. But I mean, he wrote very lyrically about river life. Now he was from Bengal, and of course at that time, Bengal was just Bengal. It was not Bangladesh. It was not Pakistan or India, and so his his writing is kind of revered. He was a leading figure in what was called the Bengal Renaissance in the 19th and early 20th century, which had writers and artists and musicians there. So, yeah, you will find Tagore's work, widely recognized and widely quoted. I wasn't aware that this was in both of the national anthem, but I'm certainly not surprised to hear that at all. Yeah, and there's a very famous poem called "The Golden Boat." But I mean, very, 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 very lyrical to read. I mean, somebody once said to me, "What you should do is you should just sort of go up and down the rivers of Bangladesh and read Tagore." I wish I'd had the time to do it, but it's it kind of evokes this sort of lost era, before urbanization, before industrialization, and kind of how the river is very interwoven with people's lives. That's the limit of my literary analysis for now. Okay, all right. So what have we got down here? How were you to get around with the English language? Did people understand you? English is widely spoken, as it is throughout the whole Indian subcontinent, because English is still, to some degree, the language of commerce, okay, not the language of government anymore. So people in hotels, people in commercial establishments will understand you. And when you get down to the level of an auto rickshaw driver, it's a combination of English and some sign language there. If you've got a few words in Bangla, the usual greetings, and always say salam alaikum to people, and they'll say alaikum salam to you. If you got a few words in Bangla, that's nice. You're showing willing there. I was dealing with university people and some government officials and people like that, so there was never really any issue. The accent is sometimes a little challenging. I always find that if I'm in India or Bangladesh, it takes me a couple of days to get my head adjusted to the accent, which can be quite thick. But no, I really didn't have any problems communicating most of the time, although I'm really good if somebody's not speaking anything to use some English, a couple of words of Bangla, and a lot of sign language, that's how we all get around. Yeah, there's a hand up there. Can you put your microphone on, sir?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I just want to make a comment about the history of Bangladesh. During
Thank
the
you.
Indian independence of 1947, when this country was divided, there were really several million who lost their lives.
Yes.
Because the Hindus were moving out of Bangladesh and Pakistan and West Pakistan, and during that time, several million lost their lives. The thing is that during 1971, Bangladesh independence war, Pakistan was really doing a devastation in Bangladesh. Indira Gandhi came to Nixon and Kissinger, and we had about 10 million refugees in West Bengal, and Indira Gandhi came here and wanted help because America was leaning towards Pakistan at that time. Well, it wanted help to moderate whatever fighting was going on and stop the fighting and all that. Kissinger and Nixon did not respond to that. And then Indira Gandhi said, I'm going to do what I have to do. So that's when she entered the Bangladeshi independence war and helped really to liberate Bangladesh from West Pakistan. And do you think that there would be some gratitude on the part of Bangladesh? No. They were in Cold War for several years after that.
Well, I mean, no, your historical account is absolutely accurate, and yeah, the United States, at least, the United States administration refused to intervene. As you say, it was leaning towards Pakistan, and also was trying to build relations with China at the same time there. Yeah. I mean, I think there's no doubt that without India's active intervention, the Indian Army, that liberation war would have gone, well, who knows how it would have turned out. Now, India was helping the Mukti Bahini clandestinely before that time. So India was supplying guns, India was supplying other aid, and India was certainly, as you say, accepting those 10 million refugees. I actually had a fascinating interview with the father of one of my colleagues who actually was training Bangladeshis to be they did sabotage on ships in ports in Bangladesh. Now, I don't know that I can comment on what you say about is Bangladesh grateful. I mean, I think some Bangladeshis are. I spoke to Bangladeshis who say, yes, we are grateful to India. Now we have trouble with India on some issues here. I mean, I think right now, if there's friction between Bangladesh and India, it's over the policies of the BJP towards Muslims, and the attitudes to illegal immigration from Bangladesh to northeast India. But it's a complicated situation. But I kind of want to thank you, sir, for filling in some of the context there. I mean, India stepped up, took 10 million refugees. I mean, there's these really interesting photographs in the National Liberation Museum in Dhaka, and maybe you've seen these as well. When people got to West Bengal, or when they got to Calcutta, some people lived in these big concrete sewage pipes. I mean, there's just these fascinating photos there. But India did what it did what it needed to do at that time, and the US basically stood aside and said it's not our problem. Other questions or comments here? I love it, by the way, when somebody fills in some details here, and I really appreciate your perspectives on this, sir.
Thank you.
Any last? Oh, we have a question in the chat. In some of the monsoon flood pictures, people had umbrellas, even though it did not look like it was actively raining. Is that done for shade?
Yes, it can be done for shade, although you don't know when the next rain is coming, so you always travel with an umbrella there. But yeah, the sun can be pretty hot there, and so keeping the sun off you is going to be good. And I have to say that during the monsoon season, putting up an umbrella probably is not going to protect you too much from the rain. I mean, it's the umbrella is more of a symbolic than a real gesture, perhaps. Yeah. Good. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you participating, and looks like Lindsay's put up the link for registration for the next one, which is April 5th, did you say, Lindsay?
That's correct, Tuesday, April 5th.
Okay, we'll be going to Indonesia.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a very
Thank you so much, David.
presentation.
Yeah.
And thank you for everyone for joining us.
Thank you to everybody. Thank you so much.
Really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it. That was good. Yeah. Thanks.
Hey, bye, Sandy. I'll see you in person sometime, Sandy. All right, good.
Every day I was cooking, but I listened. I listened. You're very, very knowledgeable. You kind of blows my mind, all the knowledge you have there.
Thank you so much, everybody. Okay, all right.
Yes.
Well, hope to see you next time. Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Good.
I thought they were all.